Let us pray. Startle us, O God, with your word. Silence in us any voice but your own. And may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and Redeemer. Amen. On Tuesday, May 10th, 2011, I was a voting minister member of the meeting of the Presbyterian of Twin Cities area. Now, I don't usually remember the dates or even the content of most Presbyterian meetings. A Presbyterian meeting is a regional gathering of Presbyterian churches in any given area, and they happen about once a month, sometimes less. But I do remember this one. You see, the previous summer, the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church USA, which is our denomination, had voted to remove the language that barred the ordination of those who identify as LGBTQ, and to replace it with language that allowed each congregation and presbytery to decide whether someone was fit for ordination regardless of their sexuality. Basically, this change would grant permission for any church, if they so chose, to ordain those who are LGBTQ, no matter their relationship status. And when a change to the Book of Order, that's one part of our Constitution, is passed by a majority vote in the General Assembly, it then gets sent back to the presbyteries, and a majority of presbyteries have to vote in favor of that amendment to make that change actually happen. It's a lot of process, I know, but hang in there, change is possible. So on May 10th, 2011, if the Presbyterian of Twin Cities area voted yes to this amendment, Amendment 10A, we would make it a majority of presbyteries voting yes, thereby changing the exclusionary policy of the church that had been in place since 1996. I won't say all eyes were on this vote because I know better. But newspapers were there, even some of the secular ones, and anyone who had done the work for the inclusion, or quite frankly, the exclusion of our LGBTQ siblings were standing by. I offered my live tweeting services to my other millennial Presbyterian nerd friends so that they could keep up with what was happening at the meeting. If you don't know what live tweeting is, it just basically means I'm telling people what's happening as it's happening through Twitter. I was given the privilege to speak at that meeting, and because I am never one to just wing it, I actually found my written statement in my archives this past week. I won't share it with you, but if you're interested, I've got them. But that evening, the Presbytery did, in fact, vote in favor of the amendment, changing the Book of Order, and I got to take part in a small way in that history. That night, with our vote, we made room for more grace and more love to flourish in our pews and in our chancels, in our seminaries, and in the world. Now, this church, Calvary, had been ordaining those who identify as LGBTQ long before 2011. You little rebels. And this congregation didn't let that 1996 ruling prevent it from continuing to ordain whomever you saw fit. In fact, the Covenant Network of Presbyterians, which was formed in 1996 to specifically overturn this exclusionary language, was housed in Calvary's basement. And Laird Stewart, who was pastor at that time, was one of Covenant Network's founding members. So this congregation has a long history of choosing inclusion over exclusion, of choosing grace over legalism. And perhaps that's why, for some of you, hanging a rainbow flag outside of the church seems unnecessary. That kind of welcome is so embedded in your DNA that it might seem redundant to you. But let me tell you, in 1996, when this language excluding people was put into the Book of Order, I was a high school student in Houston, Texas. And I so wanted to be a good Christian. I wanted to love God, and I wanted to show the world that I loved God. All my my t-shirts, and I know you can't even see beyond under my chin right now, but all the t-shirts that I wore back then, they were super Jesus-y. They had all these things about church and God on them. I think I had one that had the Gap logo. You guys might know the Gap store, right? And on the back of it, it said, God answers prayers, right? So that's the kind of Christian I was growing up. And in Texas at that time, it seemed like to love God and to be a Christian meant very specific things, at least in my world. And I'm sure I knew people who were gay and lesbian and transgender, but I didn't know that they were gay and lesbian and transgender. Because why would you tell someone that has all these slogans about Jesus when the church has proclaimed things about your very being that might be harmful? I actually made it all the way through college and into seminary before someone came out to me. JC and I started at McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago the same year. Here I was, this 23-year-old sheltered and conservative Christian from Texas, thrown into one of the most progressive seminaries in the country. I was still grappling with whether women should be ordained, let alone people who identified as LGBTQ. That wasn't even on my radar. But I wanted to learn, and I wanted to challenge myself, so I took a class called Queer, Fear, and Faithful Dissent. This class lifted up some of the ways this country and the church have excluded and denied justice to those in the LGBTQIA community. It shared the voices and stories of those harmed by this exclusion. It examined passages from Scripture that were used to justify hate and exclusion. We put these scriptures into context, we read them in their original biblical languages, and I began to be more open and more sympathetic. But I still wasn't really quite sure what I thought or what I believed. But then JC befriended me, and I learned that she wanted to serve God and the church as a minister of word and sacrament. She felt this call more strongly than even I did. That's why she had started seminary, so that one day she might be ordained. Whereas I had started seminary because I quit law school and I needed to do something with my time. But JC, though she felt called, wasn't sure if she could be ordained. She wasn't sure the church would allow it because she was a lesbian. And JC came out to me at a time when it may not have been safe to do so. I may have rejected her, condemned her, even tried to change her mind, but her risk changed the trajectory of my faith. All of a sudden, this issue of gay ordination wasn't an issue for me anymore. It was about people, about my friends, about faithful followers of Jesus who loved God and who loved the church, but were being denied the ability to serve the church simply because of their sexuality and gender identity. The first person I called on my way home from that Presbyterian meeting on May 10th, 2011, was JC. She and I cried with joy on the phone together as we celebrated this change in church policy. My personal transformation of becoming an ally to my LGBTQIA siblings didn't even start until 2006. 2006. In the grand scheme of history, do you know how late that is? That's long after Calvary ordained its first gay deacon or elder or even pastor. It's long after the first march that would become Pride, long after Stonewall. You know, this year we mark the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. Back in 1969, the Stonewall Inn was considered a place where those in the LGBTQ community could gather and just be themselves. One night, the police raided the bar, beating and arresting people simply for their sexuality and gender identity, and this was not an uncommon occurrence at the time. But on this night, the patrons were not having it. They were tired of being criminalized simply for who they were. And so they fought back, led by 2 transgender women of color. The community stood up and spoke up and created a movement that led to the first march in 1970 that would eventually become the Pride movement. Pride is a positive stance against discrimination and violence towards lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and gender fluid people. Pride is also a chance to promote self-affirmation, dignity, equality, and fundamental human rights, and to celebrate that in a safe environment. Pride is a liberation movement. Reverend Shania D. Leonard of the PCUSA says, "The reality is, pride has always been an act of intersectional defiance, started by proud, queer, trans women of color in an effort to normalize our pride in ourselves as the individuals God created us to be." Stonewall, pride parades, Calvary's own inclusive stance, all of that has shaped the conversation of this country and the church to be more inclusive and to celebrate the diversity of all God's beloved people. But there are so many people still today who are like me in 2006, who don't know the full story, who don't know the history, who still hold to exclusionary understandings of Scripture, believing it's the right way, even the only way, to love and follow God. In fact, this year, Boston is set to hold its first straight pride parade. Yep, you heard me right. In 2019, there are people who believe it is necessary to hold a straight pride parade. Brittany Dare, a UCC minister, says, "When you've been brought up in a society in which you've always had the power and the privilege, even a little bit of equality can feel oppressive. When you've been led to believe that you are more holy because of your normalized sexual orientation, you might feel mighty offended when those LGBTQ+ folks start claiming they are just as holy as you. Equality is offensive to those who are used to having the upper hand. And we are seeing that played out this summer. But the reality is that I, as a straight woman, have never had to fight for my right to marry my husband. I didn't have to wonder if my sexuality would discount me from ordination. I've never had to worry about showing affection to my partner in public. I've never been called a slur or feared for my life because of my sexuality. I never worried if my family might disown me because of who I love. I am grateful for those privileges, sure. But I don't need a parade to celebrate something that's always been normalized and accepted and handed to me on a silver platter. It is utterly unnecessary and quite honestly offensive. Between straight pride parades, attempted bans in the military against our transgender community, wildly hateful cults like the Westboro Baptist Church, and even the well-meaning, clueless person wrapped in their own heterosexual privilege like me in 2006, and let's face it, still today, it is all the more important to stand up, to speak out, to fly a rainbow flag of welcome, and to take up the mantle left for us by those who've gone before us. Like Harvey Milk, like Marcia P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, like Laird Stewart and those first members of the Covenant Network and More Light Presbyterians, and that all may freely serve, like all those who stood up and said no to oppression, no to marginalization, and no to injustice of every kind. Just as Elijah in today's scripture left his mantle to Elisha, we have been left the mantle, and we must choose to take it up. This mantle was not the source of Elijah's power, it was the symbol of it. and it held within it the history and story of the liberation of the Israelite people. It parts the Jordan River just as Moses parted the Red Sea. And yet Elijah, even with the great gifts and powers given to him by God, couldn't finish the work of God on his own. So he left that work to Elisha to continue to move forward. And Elijah took up that mantle, and it is said that Elisha didn't do this work alone, but that he shared that mantle of responsibility and ministry with others. We are all Elisha. The Elijahs who've gone before us have left us work to do. But we do not do it alone. We do not carry the mantle by ourselves. We can share and must share this work together, because just as we are all Elisha, we are also all Elijah, called to mentor and teach and bring others along behind us. We need to risk passing the mantle to generations that will follow. We have to risk sharing that mantle today with those who might just be on the cusp of being ready. Gloria Steinem has said, "You know, people often ask me at this age, who am I passing the torch to?" The torch she speaks of is the mantle that in our scripture lesson, isn't it? And here's how she replies. "I always say, first of all, that I'm not giving up my torch, thank you very much. I'm using that torch to light other people's torches. Because the idea that there's one torch passer is part of the bonkers hierarchical idea, and if we each have a torch, there's a lot more light." I love that concept, that there's not just one torch or one mantle being passed from one person to the next, but that we all each have a torch, and we share the light from that torch with others. And in that way, if one of us fails, if one of us gets exhausted or our flame burns out, there are so many others who can help relight our torch. Friends, I know that we are living in oppressive times. Human rights violations bombard us daily. There are children dying on our southern border. There are young gay youth who are taking their own lives. Black transgender women are being murdered at alarming rates. And any steps that we've made towards progress and inclusion seem to be getting rolled back and challenged. But we run this race with perseverance, with hope, with conviction, because we remember those who've gone before us, who have paved the way, who have left their mantle for us to pick up, who have shared their light and lit our torches to do the same. And we run this race with perseverance, with hope, and with conviction, because we do not run it alone. We have each other. Installing Amy Hockman this morning as elder is a perfect example of how we share this work as a church community, how we step in as we are called and say yes as Amy did, but also how our boards, even our boards of leadership like Session, have term limits. You don't have to serve forever. Other people step in and share and take on that leadership as their turn is called and as they are called. And since I'm mixing all kinds of metaphors this morning anyway, here's just one more, this time from music that you all may understand better than even I do. This one comes from Michael Moore, and he says, "This morning I've been pondering a nearly forgotten lesson I learned in high school music. Sometimes in band or in choir, music requires players or singers to hold a note longer than they can actually hold a note. In those cases, we were taught to mindfully stagger when we took a breath, so that the sound appeared uninterrupted. Everyone got to breathe, and the music stayed strong and vibrant." He continues, "Yesterday I read an article that suggested that the administration's litany of bad executive orders is a way of giving us protest fatigue. We will literally lose our will to continue the fight in the face of the onslaught of negative action. Let's remember music. Take a breath. The rest of the chorus will sing. The rest of the band will play. Rejoin so others can breathe. Together, we can sustain a very long, beautiful song for a very, very long time. You don't have to do it all, but you must add your voice to the song. Friends, the work of justice is ongoing and will go on for a long, long time, but we are called to it. And the God who created us is co-creating a new and different world where justice and peace and love reign. So take up the mantle and let others hold it too. Light your torch and share your light with someone else. Sing, sing, and breathe, and then sing again. Amen.